Most people think Jesus called God Father as a term of endearment, a poetic way of speaking about the divine, perhaps even as religious tradition dictated. But what if I told you that Jesus wasn't being poetic at all? What if he was revealing something so revolutionary, so earth-shattering about the nature of reality itself, that it would completely transform how you pray, how you face challenges, and how you understand your very existence? Stay with me until the end of this video because what you're about to discover might completely rewrite everything you thought you knew about spirituality. Have you ever wondered why Jesus never seemed to struggle in prayer the way most of us do? Why he never appeared anxious, never desperate, never begging for divine intervention like someone hoping against hope that maybe, just maybe, God would hear him this time? There's a secret hidden in plain sight throughout the Gospels, and once you see it, your entire relationship with the divine will never be the same again. It's encoded in a single word that Jesus used over and over, a word so familiar that we've stopped questioning what it really meant to him. That word is Father. Think about how you pray when you're in trouble. Has this ever happened to you? You're facing a crisis and you find yourself looking up at the sky, pleading with God like a beggar on the street corner, hoping that if you ask earnestly enough, if you're worthy enough, if you say the right words, maybe the divine will reach down from heaven and help you. But here's the startling reality that most people never grasp. Jesus never prayed like that. Not once. He spoke to God with a confidence that seemed almost shocking, as if he knew something the rest of humanity had forgotten. Now, what was this secret that Jesus understood? When he called God Father, he wasn't using religious formality. He was pointing to something that exists at the very foundation of your being right now, in this very moment. He was revealing a relationship that doesn't need to be created or earned, but simply recognized. Most of humanity lives like spiritual orphans, separated from their source, crying out into the void, hoping someone will hear them. But Jesus lived from a completely different consciousness. He knew he wasn't separate from his source. He knew that the life force animating him was the same divine presence he called Father. And this wasn't arrogance or some special status reserved only for him. This was the truth about every single human being. And what you're about to understand will change everything about how you approach your spiritual life. When Jesus used the word Father, he wasn't referring to some old man sitting on a throne in the clouds judging your every move. This is where most religious teaching has completely missed the point and created generations of people who feel perpetually disconnected from the divine. The word Father, in Jesus' consciousness, carried a meaning that goes far deeper than our modern minds typically grasp. He was speaking about source, about origin, about the very substance of existence itself. Think about it this way. When a child is born, they don't just resemble their father in appearance. They literally carry that father's DNA, his genetic code, his very life force flowing through their veins. The child isn't trying to become related to the father. The child simply is the father's expression, walking around in a new form. But before we begin diving deeper into this mystery, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. This is the hidden truth that changes everything about your spiritual journey. You are not a separate being down here on earth trying desperately to connect with a God up there in heaven. You are the direct expression of divine life itself, right now, in this very moment. The same intelligence that created galaxies and orchestrates the seasons is the substance of your being. You're not disconnected from your source trying to build a bridge back. You are the source expressing itself in temporary human form. Like a wave is the ocean, temporarily taking on a specific shape. Has this ever crossed your mind before? That you might not be seeking God at all, but that you are the very manifestation of divine presence seeking to recognize itself through your eyes? Now here's where the transformation in your mindset becomes absolutely critical. When Jesus made that radical statement, "I and my Father are one," he wasn't claiming some exclusive spiritual status that only the chosen few could access. He wasn't putting himself on a pedestal above the rest of humanity. He was actually doing the opposite. He was revealing the truth about every single person's relationship with the divine, including yours. This oneness he spoke about isn't something you need to achieve through years of meditation, countless spiritual practices, or by becoming somehow more worthy or more pure. It's not a destination at the end of a long spiritual journey. It's the foundation that already exists beneath your feet right now. The impact of truly grasping this is profound. Most people spend their entire lives trying to become spiritual, trying to reach God, trying to earn divine favor through good behavior or religious devotion. But Jesus was saying that this entire pursuit is based on a fundamental misunderstanding. You're already one with your source. You've never been separate. You've just forgotten, or perhaps more accurately, you've been taught to believe in a separation that never actually existed. The spiritual journey isn't about becoming something you're not. It's about recognizing what has always been true. It's about removing the layers of false beliefs that have covered up the reality of your divine inheritance. This recognition doesn't require years of effort. It requires a shift in consciousness, a moment where the truth suddenly becomes clear and you realize you've been searching for something you already possessed. Write in the comments, "I am one with my source," if this revelation is beginning to shift something inside you. Now, I want to go even deeper into this understanding, because there's a practical dimension to this that most people never discover. Let me give you a picture that will make this concept crystal clear, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Imagine standing on a beach watching the waves roll in. Each wave rises up from the ocean, moves across the surface, crashes onto the shore, and then returns back into the vastness from which it came. Now here's the question that unlocks everything. Is the wave separate from the ocean? Is it trying to become oceanic? Is it reaching and striving to connect with the water that surrounds it? Of course not. The wave already is the ocean. It's simply the ocean temporarily taking on a specific form, a momentary expression of the entire body of water. The wave doesn't have a different substance than the ocean. It's not made of something else trying to merge with the sea. It is the sea, just shaped differently for a brief moment in time. This is exactly what you are in relationship to the divine. You're not a human being down here trying desperately to reach God up there. You are God's own life temporarily expressing in human form. You are the divine taking on a specific shape for this particular journey through time and space. The substance of your being isn't separate from the source. You are made of the same essential reality, the same consciousness, the same life force. This understanding completely revolutionizes how you approach your entire existence. When you really grasp this truth at a level deeper than intellectual agreement, when it sinks into your very bones, something extraordinary happens in your experience of life. Smith Wigglesworth spent years teaching this principle because he understood that it addresses the root cause of virtually all human suffering. And what is that root cause? It's the belief in separation. It's the deep, often unconscious conviction that you are alone, cut off, disconnected from your source. This belief creates a constant undercurrent of anxiety in most people's lives. Even when things are going well on the surface, there's this nagging sense that something is missing, that you're not quite complete, that you need to find something or become something more before you can truly be at peace. Every fear, every desperate grasping, every moment of feeling lost or abandoned stems from this fundamental misunderstanding about who you really are. But here's where the transformation in your daily experience becomes tangible and real. When you begin living from the consciousness that God is your actual source and substance, not just as a nice spiritual concept, but as a lived reality, everything shifts. You stop begging. Think about what begging implies. It implies that you're outside, that you're disconnected, that you have no natural right to what you're asking for. But when you recognize the father-child relationship as Jesus taught it, you realize that you're not begging a stranger. You're recognizing your inheritance. A child doesn't beg their father for the family name. They simply have it by virtue of being born into that family. In the same way, divine nature is your birthright, not something you have to earn or convince God to give you. This is where the real impact shows up in how you move through your days. You stop exhausting yourself with spiritual effort, trying to manufacture worthiness or force divine connection through sheer willpower. Instead, you start allowing. You start receiving the divine nature that is already the Substance of your being begins to flow through you naturally and effortlessly, not because you've finally become good enough, but because you've stopped blocking it with the belief that you were ever separate in the first place. Put down in the comments, "I am ready to receive," if you're feeling this shift happening in your understanding right now. Because what happens when you truly live from this consciousness affects every single decision you make, every relationship you have, every challenge you face. The practical power of this revelation becomes immediately obvious when you're actually facing a crisis in your life. Pay attention to how most people pray when they're in trouble. They look up toward the sky and say something like, "Please God, if you're listening, I really need help with this problem. Please do something. Please intervene. Please make this situation better." There's nothing wrong with that prayer on the surface, but notice what's embedded in it. There's an assumption running underneath every word. The assumption that God is somewhere else, somewhere distant, and needs to be convinced to come down and help you. It's the prayer of someone who believes they're separated from their source, standing outside looking in, hoping to get divine attention. If this kind of deep spiritual content speaks to you, if you're hungry for teachings that go beyond surface-level religion into actual transformation, then subscribe to the channel. This is where we dive into the mystical truth that change how you experience life. But when you understand the Father relationship the way Jesus taught it, your entire approach to challenges transforms completely. You're no longer praying from a place of disconnection, trying to bridge a gap. Instead, you recognize that divine wisdom is already present within you as your true nature and inheritance. It's not something external you need to go out and acquire. It's not something you need to beg to receive. It's already the substance of your consciousness right now in this moment. This shift in mindset changes the energy of how you face difficulties. Instead of panic and desperation, there's a quiet confidence that comes from knowing you have access to infinite intelligence because that intelligence is the very foundation of your being. Look at how Jesus operated when he encountered people who needed healing. The Gospels are full of these accounts, and if you read them carefully, you'll notice something striking. Jesus never looked up to heaven and begged God to please heal this person. He never performed elaborate rituals to try to convince the divine to intervene. He simply acknowledged the Father's presence right there in the situation. He operated from an awareness that where God is, wholeness must be. Where the Father is present, the child's needs are already met by the very nature of the relationship itself. This wasn't magical thinking or wishful optimism. This was Jesus living from the recognition that divine presence isn't absent from any situation waiting to be called in. It's already there as the underlying reality, and recognition of that presence is what allows healing to manifest. Think about the impact this has on how you approach your own life's difficulties. When you're facing a health crisis, a financial challenge, a relationship breakdown, or any other situation that feels overwhelming, you have a choice in how you meet it. You can meet it from the consciousness of separation, which creates anxiety and desperation. Or you can meet it from the consciousness of the Father relationship, which means recognizing that divine intelligence is already present in this situation, already working toward resolution, already holding the answer even if you can't see it yet. This doesn't mean you become passive or stop taking practical action. It means you take action from a completely different inner state, one of trust rather than fear, one of connection rather than isolation. The hidden truth behind every healing Jesus performed was this recognition of presence. He didn't make God show up. He acknowledged what was already there. And this same principle applies to every area of your life where you need transformation. The wholeness you're seeking isn't absent waiting to arrive. It's present waiting to be recognized. Write in the comments, "Divine wisdom is my true nature," if this is beginning to change how you see your own challenges. Because what happens when you consistently live from this awareness creates results that most people would call miraculous, but which are actually just the natural unfolding of recognizing what's already true. There's a fundamental misunderstanding that has been passed down through generations of religious teaching, and it's created so much unnecessary suffering in people's spiritual lives. You've been conditioned to approach God like someone standing outside a locked gate, pleading with the owner to please let you in, to please give you some scraps from the table, to please consider you worthy enough for a blessing. But that entire framework is built on a lie. The lie is that you're outside. The lie is that you need to convince God to share resources with you. The lie is that divine supply is something you have to earn through good behavior or perfect spiritual performance. Here's what changes everything about this dynamic. When you understand the father relationship the way Jesus lived it, you realize that a father's resources are his child's inheritance. Not through pleading, not through proving worthiness, not through performing religious rituals correctly, simply through the fact of relationship itself. A child in a family doesn't have to beg their father for access to the family resources. The child has a natural inheritance by virtue of being part of that family. The father's abundance flows naturally to the child because that's the nature of the relationship. When you truly grasp this at a deep level, your entire prayer life undergoes a radical transformation. You shift from begging into recognition, from anxious striving into restful knowing, from desperate effort into peaceful receiving. Let me share a real story with you that demonstrates the power of this shift in consciousness. There was a woman named Margaret who spent 30 years of her life in desperate, agonizing prayer. She suffered from chronic pain that never left her, not for a single day. Every morning she would wake up and the pain would be there waiting for her. Every night she would go to bed praying that maybe tomorrow would be different. She begged God constantly to take away her suffering. She attended every healing service she could find. She read every spiritual book promising relief. She consulted with practitioners and pastors and anyone who claimed to have answers. But nothing changed. The pain remained. And with each passing year, she felt more abandoned, more hopeless, more convinced that God had forgotten about her, or perhaps had decided she wasn't worthy of healing. Then Margaret encountered Smith Wigglesworth's teaching about the father relationship, and something in her began to stir. At first, she resisted the idea strongly. How could she possibly not be separate from God when her body screamed with pain every single moment? How could divine wholeness be her true nature when her lived experience was the complete opposite? But there was something in this teaching that touched a place deep inside her that all the years of begging had never reached. She made a decision that would change everything. She began sitting quietly each morning, and instead of asking God to heal her, instead of pleading for relief, she simply acknowledged God as her actual source, as the substance of her being, as her life itself. For 3 weeks, nothing seemed to change in her physical condition, but something was shifting behind the scenes in her consciousness. Then, one morning during her quiet time of recognition, she felt something she hadn't felt in 3 decades. A presence, not outside her but as her very being. In that moment, the truth became real to her. God wasn't a distant helper she needed to convince. God was her own life source expressing as her. Within 2 months, her pain began diminishing gradually. Within 6 months, it was completely gone. Type in the comments, "Transformation is happening now," if Margaret's journey resonates with something you're experiencing in your own life. Because what happened to her reveals a principle that applies to every situation where you need breakthrough. Every area where you've been struggling and striving without results. Margaret's story isn't an isolated incident. This same principle works in every area of human experience where we face challenges and feel stuck. Let me tell you about a man named Thomas, who was watching his business crumble around him. For years, he had been struggling, with failure after failure. Customers stopped coming, sales dried up. His financial situation became so desperate that it threatened to destroy not just his livelihood, but his family's security and peace of mind. And like so many people do when they're drowning, Thomas prayed constantly. He prayed for God to send customers. He prayed for sales to improve. He prayed for some miraculous intervention to solve his financial crisis. But his prayers felt like shouting into an empty void. Words disappearing into silence with no response coming back. The turning point came when Thomas discovered Smith Wigglesworth's writings about the father principle. Something clicked in his understanding that changed his entire approach. He realized he had been treating God like a cosmic vending machine, putting in prayers and expecting blessings to come out the other end. This transactional mindset was actually reinforcing the very consciousness of separation that was blocking his breakthrough. So, Thomas made a radical decision. He stopped begging for business success. Instead, he began spending time each day recognizing that divine intelligence was his true mind, that infinite supply was his actual substance, not something external he needed to attract or manipulate into his life. This wasn't positive thinking or affirmation techniques. This was a fundamental shift in his understanding of where his source actually was. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It took 8 months of consistent practice, 8 months of holding this new consciousness even when circumstances still looked dire. But gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, things began to shift. Opportunities started appearing that he never could have engineered through human strategy alone. Connections formed naturally. His business stabilized and then began to thrive. What happened to Thomas reveals something crucial about how this father consciousness actually works in practical daily life. The change happens first in your awareness, in your inner state, in your mindset about who you are and where your supply comes from. Then that inner transformation begins manifesting in your outer circumstances. If this video shifted something in your awareness, if you felt that recognition dawning as we explored these truths together, show your support by hitting the like button. It helps this message reach others who need to hear it right now. Now, you might be wondering how to actually apply this in your own life. How do you move from intellectual understanding to lived experience? Smith Wigglesworth taught what he called the practice of the presence, and it's simpler than most people expect. Every morning before your day begins, before you check your phone or jump into your to-do list or start worrying about everything on your plate, sit quietly for 10 to 15 minutes. Here's what's critical. Don't ask God for anything during this time. Don't present your wish list. Don't beg for help with your problems. Simply acknowledge the truth. God is my life right now. God is my breath. God is my consciousness. God is my very being in this moment. You're not trying to create something new. You're recognizing what already exists. Practice this daily for at least 30 days without judging whether it's working or not. You're not trying to make God present, because God is already present as the substance of your existence. What you're doing is training your awareness to recognize what has always been true. You're rewiring your consciousness from separation to union, from lack to abundance, from fear to trust. This isn't meditation in the traditional sense. This is recognition of reality. Write in the comments, I recognize my source, if you're ready to commit to this daily practice. Because when you consistently live from this awareness, something begins to happen in how you make decisions, how you face obstacles, how you show up in relationships. But the practice of presence isn't just something you do in the morning and then forget about for the rest of the day. Smith Wigglesworth taught something else that brings this consciousness into your actual lived experience moment by moment. Throughout your day, as you're moving through your activities and responsibilities, you'll inevitably hit moments where you feel yourself straining, struggling, anxious about something. Maybe it's a difficult conversation you need to have. Maybe it's a problem at work that seems impossible to solve. Maybe it's a health concern or a financial pressure or a relationship tension. Whatever it is, you'll feel that familiar tightness in your chest, that mental spinning, that sense of being overwhelmed and alone with the weight of it all. This is the exact moment where the transformation happens. Instead of staying in that anxious state, instead of letting yourself spiral into fear and worry, pause for just a moment. Take a conscious breath, then silently say to yourself these simple words: My Father is present here. Divine intelligence is operating in this situation right now. That's it. You're not trying to solve the problem in that moment. You're not forcing a positive outcome through willpower. You're interrupting the pattern of what Smith Wigglesworth called orphan consciousness, that state of feeling separated and alone that actually creates most of our suffering. When you remember the father relationship in the midst of challenge, something shifts. You relax. You stop trying to control everything through human effort alone. You allow divine intelligence to operate through you and through the situation itself. This practice is powerful because it changes the energy you bring to every decision and interaction. A teacher named Elizabeth used this technique when she had to face a difficult conversation with her school principal about a sensitive issue. Instead of rehearsing arguments and building up defensive strategies in her mind, she spent 10 minutes simply acknowledging the father's presence in the situation. The conversation unfolded with a grace that surprised her. Solutions appeared that neither person had planned. This is what happens when you live from recognition rather than separation. Now, I need to be honest with you about something important, because if I don't tell you this, you might give up too early on your journey. The first and most common obstacle you're going to face is doubt. After years, maybe decades, of believing you are separate from God, of living from orphan consciousness, your mind is going to resist this new understanding. You'll practice recognizing the father relationship one moment, and then fall right back into old patterns of fear and separation the next. You'll have moments of clarity followed by long stretches where it feels like nothing is working, and you're fooling yourself with spiritual fantasy. This is completely normal. Don't judge yourself harshly when this happens. Smith Wigglesworth himself, who taught these principles so powerfully, said it took him years to stabilize in this consciousness after his initial awakening. The pattern of separation is deeply grooved into human thinking. You're not just learning something new. You're unlearning a lifetime of conditioning that told you that you were alone, that you were disconnected, that you had to earn your way into divine favor. That kind of deep programming doesn't disappear overnight just because you intellectually understand a new concept. Be patient with yourself in this process. When doubt arises, and it will arise, don't fight it with force. Don't condemn yourself for not being spiritual enough. Simply return to the practice quietly and gently. Acknowledge silently to yourself, whether you feel it or not in this moment, God is my life right now. The Father is present as my being. You're not trying to manufacture a feeling or force yourself to believe something that doesn't feel true. You're stating reality and allowing your consciousness to gradually catch up with what has always been true about your existence. Put down in the comments, I am patient with my unfolding, if you recognize that this journey requires gentleness with yourself. Because what happens as you persist in this practice, even through the doubt, even through the moments where it feels like nothing is changing, gradually begins to reshape your entire experience of being alive. There's another obstacle that's even more challenging than doubt, and it's the one that causes most people to abandon this path entirely. It happens when your circumstances seem to dramatically contradict everything you're learning about the Father relationship. Your body might be sick while you're trying to recognize divine wholeness as your true nature. Your bank account might be empty while you're acknowledging infinite supply as your substance. Your relationships might be falling apart while you're practicing the presence of divine love. In those moments, everything in your rational mind screams that this spiritual teaching is just wishful thinking, that you need to face reality, that recognizing God as your Father isn't solving your actual problems. This is the critical turning point where most people give up. They decide that this teaching might work for others, but not for their specific situation, not for problems this severe, not when things have gotten this bad. But here's what Smith Wigglesworth understood that changes everything about how you navigate these difficult moments. This is exactly when recognition has its greatest power, not because it makes your problems disappear instantly like some kind of magic trick, not because it waves a wand and suddenly everything is perfect, but because recognition keeps you connected to the source of all healing and supply, even when appearances suggest that source is absent. Think about what happens when you let circumstances convince you that you're separated from your source. You spiral into fear. You make decisions from panic. You close yourself off from solutions that might be trying to reach you. You cut yourself off from the very intelligence that could guide you through the crisis. But when you maintain recognition of the Father's presence even in the midst of challenging appearances, you keep yourself open. You stay receptive to guidance. You allow healing and supply to flow toward you from the invisible realm of divine substance. The circumstances haven't changed yet, but your relationship to them has transformed completely. A woman named Sarah faced foreclosure on her home with absolutely nowhere to turn. Every single day, the situation looked worse and more hopeless. But she practiced acknowledging the Father as her true source, regardless of what the paperwork said, regardless of what the bank statements showed, regardless of what her fear-filled mind kept screaming at her. She didn't deny the challenge. She didn't pretend everything was fine. She simply refused to let the appearance cut her off from recognition of divine supply that was her actual substance. 3 weeks before the foreclosure deadline, an unexpected solution appeared through a series of events that no human mind could have predicted or orchestrated. Now, as you continue deeper into this practice over weeks and months, something extraordinary begins to happen in your consciousness. Smith Wigglesworth called it the Great Release, and it's the moment that ends all spiritual seeking. You suddenly realize with startling clarity that you were never actually separated from God. You were never actually cut off from your source. You never needed to find your way back home through spiritual effort or discipline or becoming more worthy. You were always the Father's expression. You were always living in divine presence. You had simply forgotten, simply believed a story about separation that was never true. When this realization lands in your being, not just as an intellectual concept but as lived truth, there's an immense relief that washes through you. All the burden you've been carrying falls away. The burden of separation, the burden of needing to become worthy enough, the burden of having to achieve spiritual enlightenment through years of discipline and practice. All of it simply dissolves when you recognize what has always been true about your existence. Write in the comments, the burden is lifting, if you're beginning to feel this release happening in your own awareness right now. Because from this place of recognition, your entire experience of daily life begins to shift in ways that affect not just your spiritual understanding, but every practical dimension of how you move through the world. If you've made it this far in this video, I want you to know that's not a coincidence. Something in this message was meant to reach you right now, at this exact moment in your journey. The fact that you stayed through this entire exploration of what Jesus really meant by calling God Father tells me you're ready for a deeper transformation in your spiritual life. You're not just casually curious, you're genuinely seeking to live from a different consciousness, and that matters. I create content like this because I believe these teachings need to reach people who are tired of surface-level spirituality, who are ready to move beyond religious formality into actual lived experience of divine connection. If this resonates with you, if you want more content that goes this deep into practical mystical Christianity and how it applies to your daily life, then subscribe to the channel. This is where we explore these revelations together, where we unpack the hidden truths that most spiritual teaching glosses over or misses entirely. And if this video touched something real in you, if you felt that shift happening as we moved through these concepts together, do me a favor and hit the like button. It helps this message reach others who need to hear it, who are searching for exactly what you just discovered. But more than that, it lets me know this content is landing, that it's creating the impact it's meant to create in people's lives. Leave a comment right now and just write, "This message was meant for me." I read every single comment, and I want to know you were here, that you received this, that you're on this path of recognizing your true relationship with the divine source. Now there's another video right here that takes this understanding even further into practical application. It explores what happens when you consistently live from this Father consciousness in your relationships, your work, your purpose. Click on it and continue this journey with me. I'll meet you there.